Fascinating.
Now, just some house announcements before we begin. I know that many of you have submitted questions to Senior Minister Tharman in advance, but due to time constraints, unfortunately, we are only able to address a few of them today. You can submit your questions once again via Pigeonhole, which can be accessed via the instructions on the screen. Or you can also ask your questions here in this hall right here. So you can see that there are microphones on the aisles. You may pose your questions there as well. Do identify yourselves and the organization or school that you are representing before posing your question. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we'll now commence with the question and answer session. Over to you, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, SM Tharman, for really a completely wide-ranging, very insightful coverage of the world and Singapore in particular. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions about Singapore. I found your talk about third space to be particularly interesting, and there are parallels with what we're doing in Singapore too. But perhaps I could just go back a little bit earlier to the earlier part of your speech. When you touched upon what you called a loss of optimism across the world. And then I noted that you touched upon largely OECD countries, largely aging Western liberal democracies. You pointed out that Singapore was relatively optimistic. In your later part, you talked about optimism in ASEAN and Asia. I wonder to what extent you have information about the optimism index, parents feeling that children would do better than them, in non-aging Western liberal democracies. Certainly in India, in ASEAN, in Indonesia, in poorer developing countries, not in the sub-Saharan places, which is even getting worse, but in the rising Asian economies, wouldn't that sense of optimism be greater? And wouldn't that then indicate that part of the whole problem we're seeing today is, to a great extent, the four insecurities that you talk about, all the fragilities are global, but to what extent is this exacerbated by a declining West and a rising Asia, so that perhaps that sense of pessimism is not entirely shared around the world?
Well, that's a very good question, Kwon Ping. I would say first, although you don't have very good surveys on this from all accounts, and when you visit these places you can tell, there is optimism in Southeast Asia and India, most of Southeast Asia. These are growing societies. People still feel that they've got much better jobs ahead compared to what their parents had. The digital economy is taking off. These are optimistic places. And I believe that this decade will be Southeast Asia and India's decade. I do not take the view that the features of this era we've entered can be characterized simply as a decline of the West and the rise of the East. Asia itself is, expect the unexpected in Asia. I'm relatively confident about India and Southeast Asia if they invest in human capital, if they keep on integrating with the rest of the world, but nothing is linear. What we are seeing is a shifting balance within Asia. More production, started with the low end, now some other components of factory production are shifting to Southeast Asia, out of China, now into India. You're seeing some rebalancing, but I always hold my breath when people say it is Asia's century and Asia is rising. Expect the unexpected, and never underestimate the innovative power of the United States. Mm-hmm. It is beset with domestic difficulties. Its social problems are getting, the social divisions are hardening, but never underestimate its innovative capability.
I would agree that it would be very dangerous for us to do so, but to what extent do you think that it is the West, and largely led by the US, that is really not willing to give up a post-Bretton Woods sort of global rule-based order, which is largely Pax Americana? And to what extent, you've left out China also, by the way, when you talk about India and Southeast Asia. So I'd like to ask you a question of your overall view on China. two questions. One is largely economic and the other one is geopolitical. The geopolitical one is we have all seen how, particularly the recent announcements about no more strategic ambiguity, but strategic clarity, to what extent is there bipartisan consensus in the US that China should be taken down sooner than later, that eventually China is going to come to conflict with the US and they better take it down now? Because it looks like it's a very moving towards that direction. So what is your view on geopolitical tensions, and to what extent can the multilateralism that you promote really happen when domestic politics in the US seem really driven towards conflict with China sooner rather than 20 years from now? The second part of the question is on China's own economy. I think we all know that foreign investors, hedge funds and so on don't think China is such a great investment opportunity today. But what is your view about China's own pivoting towards less dependence rather than greater interdependence with the US, and China's determination that if sanctions are ever going to be imposed upon it, it must be independent in the four critical areas of technology, energy, finance, and food. And it looks like everything China is doing today is making itself much more independent. What are your views on those two aspects of China?
Well, that's, again, a very good set of questions that Kwon Ping has asked. I would say, I would make 3 points. First, yes, there's clearly a bipartisan consensus in the US about the need to contain China, hold it down. You see it with each month, additional measures to try to deny China of various technologies, various products, and to reduce its space. I think we will not reach an equilibrium that serves US interests without the US and other leading nations giving China a role and responsibility in multilateral leadership. The multilateral system serves US interests. It was made in the interests of the US, but it's also served the global interest, by and large. Never perfectly, always with flaws, but by and large, it's led to a remarkable wave of prosperity and global peace, even if not peace in every country and region, over the last 70 years. And that multilateral system is the US's key strength. And they've got to use that strength, accommodate China within it, develop some shared responsibilities, because a path of bilateral contestation is first not going to be easily successful, but secondly is going to reduce the space for both the US and China. It is not a win-lose game. It is a lose-lose game. So, and you know, if you listen to people like Henry Kissinger, if you listen to many other very thoughtful strategic thinkers, they will say, think of how you use the global multilateral system, and think of how you use the openness of US society, its universities, its society, as a source of strength.
You mentioned Kissinger, but I think part of the reason for many of us being rather pessimistic these days is that someone like Kissinger, both across Democratic and Republican sides of Congress, they're considering him now an old man who's out of touch, and he's far too accommodating to China and to multilateralism. I mean, do you feel quite optimistic that in the next 10 years, China-US relations can actually get back to some sort of equilibrium without some deepening conflict first?
I'm not optimistic. I think the differences are hardening and there's some path dependence. In other words, what's happening now within the US and within China has a self-reinforcing feature to it. More and more self-sufficiency, more and more separation. The point is, that will lead to a more dangerous world for both the US and China and the rest of the world. It's a very simple thought experiment. Just imagine a world where China is not part of the global market system. Trade, investment, technology, payment systems, data. Just imagine that world. It takes you back to the old Cold War. There is no Cold War today because China is actually integrated in the system. If it takes you back to the old Cold War, you will get the old Cold War.
Well, thank you.
It's as simple as that.
Thank you for talking a bit about the world as a whole. We probably should stop on this topic before we further depress all the young people amongst us here, because I've got a number of questions, SM, that is much more grounded in what they want to hear from you and not about the whole world. They're really thoroughly depressed as they are now. Thankfully, we're not having a lot of people queuing up because we're now using modern technology, and I'm getting 400 over questions from people. They've all been grouped in terms of popularity. And as you can imagine, the most popular question that they want to pose to you is, in the present situation with impending recession, inflation, and so on, there's a lot of fear among young graduates about their future. Very bread and butter issues. So if we can sort of turn from the world to today, what can you tell our young people in this very difficult world? And especially those who are going to begin to graduate. We told students when they were in SMU during COVID that they were in really bad times where things were going to improve. Now we're coming out of COVID, but we're going into a world that is even more fractious than before. What would you tell all the young people here today? How should they confront this world that is so, that as you have said, is unprecedented in 80 years?
Well, I make 2 points. And I don't want to be rhetorical about it. First, I say this quite seriously. The moment you're born in Singapore, you're lucky. And there's serious studies, by the way, that show this. Being born in different parts of the world, unfortunately, shapes so much of your life outcomes. It shapes so much of your life outcomes. Where are you born? So that's the first point. You're born in a country where you will have opportunity, and when you can, through your effort, through the teams you're part of, you can get fulfillment in life. You can be part of a multicultural society and feel good about it, not always suspicious of your neighbor. Second point I'll make is that increasingly for the future, this was true of the past, but increasingly for the future, we each need to have some self-belief, something we want to be good at. Spend time on it and try and be very good at it. If you spend time on what you want to be good at, things will work out. Things will work out. It doesn't mean that you'll be in that same area, that same hobby, that same job forever. But if you just have that habit of trying to be good at what you're doing and being quite, spending a lot of your free time on it as well, spending your time in your evenings, reading up more about the area, talking to friends about it, watching YouTube. If you get interested in something and spend time on it and want to be very good at it, whether it's art or physics or anything, life works out.
But do you think, I know that the leadership today in Singapore in education talk about the same, what you've said, that we shouldn't be so emphasizing grades, we should be now more innovative and so on. Do you think the educational system in Singapore is changing fast enough to accommodate the needs that you see, or do you think there's still some sort of inbound, some inbred bureaucratic resistance to the idea that we should all, and I'm just looking at all the young students here, do they really believe that if you really just are passionately following what you want to do, that you'll get ahead, and that the educational system, in fact, is not holding you back?
Well, I think we are halfway along this journey where everyone is judged, not just when they leave school, but through life, based on their aptitudes rather than grades earned earlier in life. If I compare us with other Asian systems, we've moved a lot further. In India, the competition for grades is just enormous. I mean, you want to try and get in an IIT, it's just enormous. But it's not just that. The grade you get in that entrance exam stays with you right to the end of your career in the Indian civil service. The ranking of who was number 1, who was number 19, who was number 20 stays with you throughout your career. If you look at China, Japan, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Korea, cultures which had a lot of similarity with us, and in education there was a lot of that culture of education that came from East Asia. They haven't moved as far as we have towards loosening the system, broadening the range of aptitudes that people are encouraged to develop, and which society is starting to value. But we are not yet there. We inherited a culture from East Asia and from Britain. Britain, too, had a very academically focused culture, quite different from Europe, quite different from the Northern Europeans especially. And it was a culture in Britain that didn't look up to trade skills, to vocational skills and applied skills. It was a very academic culture. And we inherited two very academic cultures, East Asian and British. And we've been working our way out of that. And I think we're doing so at a reasonable pace, because if you go too quickly, it unsettles people. It unsettles parents. And you've got to do things at the right measure and with the right steps in education. We are making progress, but I think we're halfway on that journey.
Okay. So we have two people who, despite the advent of technology, are determined to ask you a question live. So could I ask you, sir, to ask your first question, and then you ask your second question?
Some very enlightening lecture, Irshad from the Tata Group and also adjunct at SMU here.
Could you speak a little bit louder, please?
Sure. Two questions. The first one is, you give a very enlightening speech. How do you prepare for the unknown unknowns? We know about the known knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns. How do you prepare for the unknown unknowns? And how do you communicate to the public at large in Singapore? The second question is about the third space. I thought it was a very unique concept. How do you envision that panning out in practice? And how do you build that cultural quotient here in Singapore amongst the people? Thank you.
So on the first question, I would say don't try to predict the unknown unknowns, because by definition you can't, but build resilience, individual, team resilience, and social resilience. To be quite candid, this pandemic was a known unknown. It was predicted. We didn't know exactly which virus, but it was predicted. But the world was unprepared. We were all unprepared. But Singapore did have resilience, a system of trust between people, trust between government and people, that held it in quite good stead through the pandemic. People followed the rules not just because they were instructed to do so, but they thought, yes, we better follow the rules because it's in our interest. So build resilience, starting from young, which means the ability to take knocks from time to time, the ability to bounce up after you've taken a knock, but also the trust between people, a very important part of social resilience. On your second question, I spoke about it briefly. I feel that these things start early in life. Things like Racial Harmony Day are still far too formulaic. It's almost, to my mind, it can even be a negative, because it gives you the impression that you're doing something multicultural when you're not. So we have to take seriously the everyday and every week activities of children. How often do you have CCA that's with people of different backgrounds? Do you meet up after CCA? In our time, of course, we had a lot of free time. You know, we went to the Sarawat stall and we had lots of things to do after school. But students are under more time pressure now, but they still go out a lot. They socialize a lot. So who are your friends? Who do you sit with during recess time? How many times a week are you doing CCA with people of a different background? And when schools are more homogeneous, how do you make sure that you've got cross-school teams practicing together week after week, year after year? So engagement and interaction is how you develop that sensibility and that cultural breadth that I feel we need. And I think we can develop. It'll make Singapore more resilient and it'll make life more enriching.
Thank you. Sir?
Thank you. Thank you, Minister and Chairman. My name is Yi Sheng. I'm from the Master of Laws program here at SMU. My question goes to your point earlier on that to deal with the higher order problems of climate, food insecurity, there needs to be a reset in the US-China relations. And to my mind, that reset would probably be a stronger China because it would remove the constraints of containment that are currently in place. Minister, my question is, what do you think a stronger China would mean for the wider state of fragility and in particular global finance, given that this is a country that will soon be the largest economy in the world and yet has not been tested by its own global financial crisis? Thank you.
I think the rules of the game will have to ensure fair competition in trade, in investments, and rules of the game to ensure technological interoperability. Every country will want to make sure that national security is preserved. And there's some technologies and some products which you will be very careful who you're sourcing from, and you often try to develop it yourself. All the major countries do that. But that is just one segment of an economy. Most of an economy actually deals with a whole range of consumer products and investment products that are not national security sensitive. Just think about this. China is already the largest producer of renewables in the world. And in the next 5 years, China is going to account for more than 40% of additional global renewable energy capacity. It'll be a huge advantage to the world to be able to use Chinese renewable energy and batteries and the like. Huge advantage. So, a world where we keep China out of the international system and constrain it is going to be a world that is more expensive, will make a slower transition to clean energy, and will be a more fractious world. China itself wants to be a global leader. It'll have to play by new rules of the game because it's not a small developing country. It's a very large country, and although average income levels are not high, they're only about they're less than a quarter of US levels. It is a formidable player, and it has to accept that there'll have to be some rules of the game to ensure that the trade relationship and investment relationship can be sustained and is perceived by everyone as fair. But I believe this can be achieved. It can be achieved.
Thank you. We have time, I think, only for the last two questioners. Yourself first, and then you can ask the last question.
Good afternoon, Senior Minister Tharman. Thank you so much for the lecture. And I'm just, pardon me for being old-fashioned, but at least this guarantees my chance to feel my curiosity. So my question really has to do with social compact within Singapore. You have identified the insecurities that we have, that you have mentioned in your lecture, and we can take steps from home to contribute to solving these insecurities. Now, refreshing social compact is one of the key strategies that we are embarking on, and the Ministry of Social and Family Development has laid out different aspects of our social compact that we aim to achieve. Primarily, income inequalities we aim to use. Employment is one of the key factors under the progressive wage model to close these inequalities. But there are certain instances where parties, particularly employers, that might exploit certain loopholes that are not lawfully wrong but not ethically right either. So what are some strategies that we have or should be taking to better protect these workers and, broadly speaking, protect this small aspect that has major significance for our social impact, social compact?
So just to be clear, you're referring to employment practices, right?
Yes, sir.
And you're thinking of hiring or promotion, or what type of practices are you thinking of?
For the progressive wage model that's implemented for, say, at the very beginning for, say, unskilled workers.
Okay, so you're talking about the PWM, the progressive wage model.
Yes, sir.
All right. So issues can be ironed out. It is a major new initiative. We started with a few sectors, cleaners, security guards, and so on. We're now extending it to a very significant part of the workforce, the lower wage workforce. Issues can be ironed out. If you find there are cases of employers finding loopholes and trying to abuse the scheme, just let us know. We'll have a look. It's working quite well so far, but in any national scheme of that sort, which doesn't, rely on, it's not as if you can measure exactly how an employee is being treated. There may be issues, but I feel issues can be ironed out.
Thank you.
I mean, if you have a major problem in mind, let me know.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Last question, sir.
Good afternoon, Senior Minister Tharman and Chairman Mr. Ho. I am Chan Yun Kai, and I'm from the National University of Singapore, studying civil engineering. So I have one question for you. I think it's about our social, our society, how we organize our society. So how civic organizations and civic society can play a role in promoting social cohesion and bring people together while maintaining a careful balance between state institutions and civic organizations. Thank you very much.
Well, I think your question itself has an answer. I agree with you that our civic society organizations play an important role, and more so in the future. There's the way in which they must have their independence, but also complementarity with the government network of relationships on the ground. The big issues of the day are not issues which the government alone can solve, or government networks alone can solve. Whether it's climate change or helping kids who start off with less, all the big issues of the day require a whole set of stakeholders to get involved. Voluntary organizations, individuals who just team up with their friends and get involved. And we've got to make it possible for everyone to actually be involved and to work together. So I think we have to work out this modality where civic society organizations are welcome, they've got the space to act, and they can even complement government actions whenever they wish.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We've come to the end of today's lecture. Being the moderator, I have the right to ask you the last provocative and somewhat rhetorical question, sir. But before that, I think I can truly say on behalf of all of us that the social cohesion that you talked about in Singapore, which I think all of us here agree, we do have uniquely amongst ourselves. And the third space that you've also talked about, the civic discourse that you've talked about, you amongst almost any other of our national leaders have spent the bulk of your time in office building up this third space and the capability for civic discourse. So a lot of the social cohesion that we've witnessed and that we hope to see more of, I think truly can be credited to you. And for that, I think we should give our thanks.
Well,
that was the easy part.
Yeah, but honestly, it's a whole team. It's a whole team of government, colleagues in cabinet. We do a lot of thinking together. a lot of deliberation together, and it's a whole civil service team as well, and there's a whole set of interactions outside.
Sure, but you're a coordinating minister, sir, so if it didn't work, you take the blame. So since it has worked out well, you also get the credit. The last question I have for you is a little bit more rhetorical one, a little bit more naughty, and that is, you know, there's been so much social media talk about you being prime minister. That's passed. You passed 65. The elected presidency is coming. No, that I'm going to come to that. There've been people betting that, oh, you know, SM Tharman would make a great president. And I talked to some senior fourth generation leaders, and they said, no, he cannot be president. We need him for the next elections. So I think it's a for sure set deal. Maybe you don't know it yet, that you're going to be running in the next elections. But after that, then what? Will other countries and other people in the world be able to get the benefit of your wisdom and your insights that you've provided so far on the global stage? Probably more than any of our active political leaders, you have taken on more high-profile positions on the global stage. So my last question is, would you rule out sharing your advice, your experience, and your capabilities and your passion for global development on the global stage? And if so, what might be some possible ideas?
Well, no, frankly, in my current role, it's been a real privilege for me to represent Singapore on a range of global engagements. I'm very actively involved globally.
Yes.
I'm currently chairing a Global Water Commission, for instance, looking at, I think, the most neglected dimension of global climate change. I'm very actively involved in a number of other global initiatives. And I'm there because it's not just myself and my qualities, whatever they are. It's also Singapore that is held in great respect. So it's a privilege for me to play that role internationally. I'm actively involved. And I don't think too much about the future. I'm very comfortable in my own skin doing what I'm doing today.
Thank you, sir. I think with that advice to all young people, be very comfortable being in your own skin in whatever you're doing today. That advice is truly a heartfelt one that has taken you to great places. And I think in all our interactions with you, your authenticity has shown through. So thank you again, sir, for gracing on this
Thank
occasion.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
you,
Senior
sir.
Minister Tharman and Chairman.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, if I can request that you please remain on the stage. Now, it is a momentous occasion, so to commemorate this day, I would like to now invite the audience members to actually take a photograph. So please rise, and then also I would request that for all audience members to kind of come towards the center so that we can fit everyone in the photo frame. So please, you guys can start standing up and moving towards the center of the hall. Now, for Chairman and for Minister, if I can get you to place yourselves at the front of the stage, our photograph will be taking the photograph from the back of the stage. We don't exclude Wi-Fi as well, so guys, if you want to be included in the photo, which I highly encourage, I do ask that all of you move towards the center. I think there are some left and right limits, so as much as possible, please squeeze as close as you can, all right? That's right, don't be shy. We'll try to fit everyone in. I know it's a big hall, but I think it's possible. All right, perfect. Let me just check whether we're all in frame. Are we good? All good? All right. Ladies and gentlemen, in 3, 2, 1, we'll take our first photo. So in 3, 2, 1, smile. Perfect. Let's do a slightly cheeky one, maybe a fun one. In 3, 2, 1, let's go. All right, perfect. Are we good? All right, a warm round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for that amazing photograph and also this amazing session. With that, ladies and gentlemen, at this point, Senior Minister Tharman will now take his leave. Once again, do please remain seated, all right? Thank you very much. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your patience. We do hope that you've enjoyed the SMU Rih Hwa Leadership Lecture today. We will be most appreciative if you could share your feedback with us by scanning this QR code on the screen. Do also please remain seated and take cue from our ushers for your exit. Last thing is that we have also prepared a bag consisting of a sandwich and a drink for you to take away as you leave, so please collect that on your way out. Finally, on behalf of SMU Singapore Management University, I would like to thank all of you for coming, and I wish you a pleasant day ahead. Thank you and goodbye.